Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. Let me start with an apology that I'm not with you in person this afternoon. Unfortunately, earlier this week, I tested positive for COVID-19. As you can tell, I feel absolutely fine, but obviously it's not a sensible idea for me to be traveling to Ely to speak to you all. And if you're watching this recording, it means that unfortunately we've not been able to make the technology work for me to beam in live over Zoom. So this is the next best thing, and hopefully we'll be able to make the technology work for me to answer some questions shortly. My name is Rob Jackson. I am director of Rob Jackson Consulting Limited. I have over 28 years experience working in the non-profit field, largely around volunteer engagement, and I work internationally and have done since 2011 as a consultant, trainer, speaker, writer, thought leader on volunteer engagement in all its various different forms. I have part of the Heritage Volunteering Group executive here in the UK and have been for a number of years, and I'm an active volunteer as well in a variety of other different ways. So volunteering is that kind of proverbial thing that runs right through me if you cut me open like a stick of rock, which I hope you wouldn't do. I'm going to talk to you just for about 20 minutes about three things: the potential of volunteering, particularly for museums, obviously, as that's the audience today, the barriers that we might face to realizing that potential, many of which are because of the situation which we find ourselves in as a country at the moment, and then ending on a slightly more positive note around some of the positives coming out of the Vision for Volunteering, which was launched in England back on the 6th of May this year in Birmingham at the NEC. So the potential for volunteering, there is lots of potential for volunteering beyond, obviously, the role that volunteers will play in many, if not all, of your museums in the day-to-day operations of what you do, from opening the doors, welcoming visitors, guiding, interpreting, your boards, all of those kinds of various different roles. But there is also much more potential, and it's something that I explore in the book that I was privileged to co-write with the late, great Susan J. Ellis, an American colleague of mine. And I think there are three areas in particular that I would like to focus on that we maybe don't always recognize volunteers bring to an organization. The first is the unsalaried credibility that they bring. The fact that they are volunteers gives them a credibility, real or perceived, with visitors, with the wider public, with funders, with other key stakeholders that maybe we don't get as members of paid staff. And the clearest example I can share with you from my own career outside of the heritage sector, but was in my time working as a volunteer manager at Barnardo's many, many years ago, where we had a program that helped young people who were transitioning from living a life in the care system to living independently as they turned 18. And we had many highly committed, dedicated social workers, very professional social workers, who had worked with these young people throughout most of their lives. And we also had a team of volunteers who mentored and befriended these young people during that transition as well. And the feedback we got from the young people was that they very much viewed the volunteers as the first adults they had ever come across in their lives who actually wanted to spend time with them. Because those volunteers were by definition unpaid, it was perceived by the young people that they had a credibility that, however qualified a social worker or a foster carer may be, they lost by virtue of the fact that they received some financial remuneration for their involvement in that young person's life. And I think we see this in many ways in the wider voluntary sector and indeed the heritage sector. We instinctively get that if somebody stood outside the railway station shaking a collecting tin, they're probably a volunteer, whereas if somebody follows us down the high street asking us to commit to sign up for a direct debit, that they're probably paid. So there is a sense that your volunteers will bring to your organization that you can maximize because they have, in the eyes of many, many people, that extra degree of credibility because they are unpaid, they are by nature a volunteer. The second area which relates to this is their sphere of influence. Many of us may have no paid staff at all, and those that do have paid staff in your organizations, your volunteer numbers probably outweigh the number of paid staff. That means that just by simple mathematics, the volunteers have a greater reach, a greater sphere of influence in the community than the paid staff do. But we quite often don't maximize this. We don't get to know our volunteers well enough to know who they're connected to, what those connections are, how we might make the most of them. And it has always stuck with me that the two biggest donations that the NSPCC received in their Full Stop campaign many years ago now did not come through their major donor fundraising team. They came through their volunteers who happened to know a neighbour who had a spare couple of £1 million to throw into the pot at NSPCC. And of course, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could find those volunteers who were that well financially connected in order to generate income? But in what other ways do our volunteers have a reach and a sphere of influence and a connection in our community that could help our museums that maybe lies as untapped potential at the moment? And then the third area, which is a little bit of a double-edged sword, but does have real potential, is the luxury of focus. You've all had, hopefully, a really great day at this conference today. And many of you, if you're employees, will have also had part of your mind thinking about the emails that are piling up in your inbox and the meeting that you have tomorrow morning and the difficult conversation that you had just before you left today with maybe a volunteer or a paid colleague, whatever that may be. Volunteers don't have that. They can come in and they can focus just on the role that they are doing. That's the luxury of focus. They can concentrate on the impact that they're having, and they don't have to be concerned with the wider organizational politics. It's also, therefore, why, and I speak from personal experience in this, why sometimes it's harder to take volunteers on a journey of change with us. Because if they're not interested and don't care for that broader strategic, political, with a small p perspective in our organizations, then they don't necessarily see the drivers for change that need to take place. So there's huge untapped potential for volunteering beyond, I say, the simple, but it's often far from simple, delivery of what it is that you all do in your museums and heritage sites every day. But we have to be realistic that things are holding us back from realizing that potential. And that's largely because volunteering doesn't exist in a bubble. Anything that's going on in the wider world around us has an impact on people's willingness to give time and to continue to give time. And obviously, as a society, we have had lots of change just in the last 6 or 7 years, and lots of upheaval and lots of uncertainty. And we've seen that through the impact of the war in Ukraine. We've seen it through the impact of COVID. We've seen it through the impact of Brexit and the referendum that preceded it. We've seen it in many, many other ways as well. So over the next few slides, I just very briefly want to mention 4 areas of particular interest: rates of volunteering, the amount of time that people give, post-COVID recovery, and cost of living. And then I'll end on that vision for volunteering. So this chart is showing you data from the Community Life Survey. So this is a survey that in various different forms has been taken place by the government since around 2000, 2001, and it looks at rates of volunteering by the adult population. They basically ask people over the age of 16, did you volunteer at least once in the previous 12 months and at least once a month in the previous 12 months? And you'll see from the chart on there that whilst the figures haven't been wildly varying, we have seen over that 20-21 year period a gradual decline. And that's largely as a consequence of quite a steep decline in the last lot of data that was collected between April 2020 and March 2021. So the first year of the COVID pandemic, when we saw lockdowns taking place in quite a significant way. And inevitably, there was a drop in volunteering. There was a drop in formal volunteering. There was a slight increase in informal volunteering. That is volunteering that's not done through an organization. So lots of mutual aid groups. But despite various different counter arguments, some of which are quite kind of hyperbolic about how there was a massive boom in volunteering, even the most positive news shows that what little upswing there was in volunteering during that year still puts our overall volunteering rates as a society lower than they were in 2013, 2014. So whilst we know it's been difficult times for volunteering, it's actually been a slow decline over a number of years. And that is leading in part to the challenges many of you may be facing right now in terms of recruiting new people. Alongside that slow and gradual decline in rates of volunteering has been the fact that people are giving less time when they volunteer. So some research that was done looking at how all of us spend our discretionary leisure time between the year 2000 and 2015 showed that the amount of time that we as the British public gave to volunteering reduced. It reduced by about 1.5 days a year for 65+ year olds. and about 2.3 days per year for 25 to 34-year-olds. Those were the two biggest areas of decline. There was some good news. There was a slight increase in the amount of time that 16 to 24-year-olds were giving, which is fantastic because as a country, we've spent a lot of public money investing in young people's volunteering over the last 20 years. But overall, the trend was downwards. So what does that mean? That means that the idea that people will make a regular long-term time commitment to volunteering on day one is becoming increasingly rare. So whilst the rates of volunteering at best are flatlining and at worst are in slight decline, alongside that, we have a situation where when people do want to volunteer, they don't want to make the stereotypical 2 days a week for the next 20 years of their life commitment. They want things to be done much more on their own terms. They want things to be flexible. They want to be able to drop in and drop out of their volunteering. And I think both of those things are leading in part to the situation that many of you will be experiencing, and I know many organizations in the heritage sector and beyond are experiencing right now, which is a slow and prolonged volunteer recovery. Obviously, lots of volunteering through our organizations stopped when lockdown kicked in for the first time in March of 2020. But what we're not seeing in a significant way is those rates recovering again at pace and at speed. We've seen this in many other countries around the world, including Australia, the United States, and Canada. And that may be because people are still nervous about COVID, and so they don't want to come back, particularly if the volunteering is done in a physically enclosed space. It might be because people have enjoyed having a break from that regular long-term committed volunteering and don't really want to get back into that. It may be because they're prioritizing other things in their life. They're putting other things as more important than volunteering, whereas volunteering to them may have been out of either duty or out of personal commitment, may have gone further up that priority list in the past. It may be because people are having to go into paid work or change jobs or move house, or they have done during the pandemic. There's all kinds of reasons, but we are seeing a very slow, in many areas, recovery rate into volunteering. And the response of lots of organizations is to kind of step up and deal with that by putting more effort into recruitment. Actually, potentially what we need to be doing, as I'll talk about in a second with the vision for volunteering, is taking a fresh look at how we organize things, how we offer volunteering, what it is that we make available, because that actually may help address some of those recruitment challenges by meeting the needs of what people actually want to do. The other thing we can't get through without mentioning is the cost of living implications. We are hearing more and more about people scaling back their volunteering because they're having to prioritize paid work, people stopping volunteering because they can't claim expenses and so they don't want to be out of pocket. Perhaps volunteers who were quite comfortable being out of pocket and not claiming expenses in the past can no longer continue to do that without having some form of financial reimbursement. We're hearing from people who were quite comfortable shifting to home-based volunteering during the pandemic, who are now nervous about continuing to do that because it means they're having to meet the cost of heating and lighting their own home over the winter time. We're hearing about opportunities to open volunteering up in parallel with warm banks so that people can go to a physical place where not only can they stay warm through the winter, but they can volunteer as well. And we're hearing pushback from volunteers in many organizations who are saying, I want to be able to claim my expenses and I want to be able to get my expenses reimbursed quicker than before. And I think we have to recognize that if we don't offer reimbursement of expenses, and I understand the budgetary challenges that many of you may be under that lead you to not be able to provide that, then that does run the risk of it increasingly becoming a barrier to being able to engage volunteers in the past, because fewer and fewer people are going to be able to be out of pocket in order to volunteer. So let me end on a slightly more positive note and talk to you about the vision for volunteering. If you've not come across the vision for volunteering, I really recommend one of the things you do after today is go online and look at visionforvolunteering.org.uk. It was an initiative that was launched, as I said earlier, in May of this year by NAVCA, NCVO, Volunteering Matters, the Association of Volunteer Managers, and Sport England. And during the development of the vision, those organizations spoke to more than 350 people from more than 300 organizations right across England. And it sets out a vision for how volunteering needs to adapt 10 years from now, so in 2032. And I think particularly in resonance with today's event, there is a lot of connection with community connection, with community engagement. There are 5 broad themes around the vision. You can see them up on the screen there. They are awareness and appreciation of volunteering, power, equity and inclusion, collaboration, and experimentation. Let me just read some of the quotes from the vision to you to illustrate that kind of community connection element with each of those 5. So I run around awareness and appreciation first. The vision says that we want a future in which a culture of volunteering is further ingrained in the collective psyche, part of everybody's life from childhood to later life, and woven into the activities and pastimes of day-to-day living. A future in which it's always easy to find ways to make a difference, where volunteering is appreciated by individuals, communities, organizations, and policymakers as helping to enrich lives and enliven communities. Similarly, under power, volunteers and the communities they serve have power and are leaders. They don't need other people to stop in. The vision sets out a future where the power of volunteers and communities is recognized and supported. It's seen in the community taking action, often enabled or supported by organizations, but not always driven by them. A society in which everyone can engage with their community, identifying what matters to them and building a future they want to see. Equity and inclusion. The vision sets out a future for volunteering to be accessible and welcoming to everybody everywhere, so that the benefits of volunteering are realized and equally distributed to individuals and to communities. Collaboration. It's a vision that wants a future where collaboration is a natural, fluid, flexible, and spontaneous part of volunteering, where people do great things together because they want to, driven by shared interests and ambitions, and are proactively supported to do so. And then experimentation. It's not something that is reserved for times of crisis, says the vision, but is incorporated into the way that volunteering works every day, where communities are supported to experiment and innovate to develop their own solutions to the needs that they see. And those that create enabling environments for volunteers, whether they're leaders, funders, trustees, government, support that culture of experimentation so that communities and organizations are trusted to design projects as they see fit, to learn and to adapt. And this vision doesn't have one person leading it. It doesn't have a massive pot of money behind it. It's very much a flag in the sand. It's a rallying call for all of us who are involved in volunteering and the voluntary sector and the heritage world, wherever we come to this from, to come together and try and realize that vision, not only for the whole of our society as a nation, but also for our local communities and for our local organizations, where that awareness and appreciation of volunteering is present in all that we do, where power is equally distributed and volunteers are recognized for the power that they bring, where equity and inclusion is part of the way that we do things, and where collaboration and experimentation are encouraged and celebrated day in and day out. So I hope that's been some useful reflections for you on the potential of volunteers, some of the challenges that we may face in the coming weeks and months as we try to realize some of that potential, and the positive future that's been laid out for us by the Vision for Volunteering. Once again, my apologies for not being able to be with you in person, or if you're watching this video, to be with you live. I hope you found my remarks in the last 20 minutes helpful, and I hope you found the conference really good today. If you would like to get in touch, the details are up on the screen now. You are very welcome to get in touch and contact me, and I will be back in touch with you in response as soon as possible. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and I hope I will be able to meet you all in person at some point in the future. Thank you very much.